Good to go? Cool. So my name is Mark Stacey. Currently I work at Dragos. We're an industrial control security company. This slide deck is kind of targeted towards ICS, planning for incident handling in ICS, but a lot of it translates over to IT as well. I've got half an hour, so I'm going to spew a bunch of words really quick, and I've got some slides with a lot of content on them. I know some people are going to take out your phone, take a picture. That's all good. We are shortly going to release a refined write-up on this, and I'll provide all of that in sample documents. So if we've already got one. If you don't want to take a picture of it and then translate it over via later, then we'll release some samples. So incident response. We're not going to talk about really anything technical, but rather what you can do to prepare for incident response. And when I say prepare, I'm not talking about controls or visibility, network, host visibility, anything like that. It's what you can do to prepare based on what you've got now. So really the overall goals for IR first is to quarantine. If you've got self-propagating code, worm-like behavior. In ICS space, we worry about material release or hazardous waste release. Really the overall goal is operational resilience. I define that as expedited, economical, safe return to stable state. It's literally keeping the lights on. That is really the primary motivation, and then additionally minimize future incidents, root cause analysis. We have IR policies and procedures. Pretty much every company has those now, the whole intent being to prepare for incident handling. My argument is that the IR policies and requirements and everything don't really prepare an organization. It implies checkbox security. So most of the infrastructure in the US is privately owned and operated. It is heavily regulated by the government, however. And a lot of the documentation, when you get down to the specific sectors, they have some reporting requirements, time reporting requirements, but overall the guidance is pretty vague. And this is a good example where we have subjective adverbs in there and adjectives like timely detection and response. Correct exploited vulnerabilities. What does that mean? A lot of them have lessons learned. Is that protection, detection, the incident response process? So the guidance is somewhat arbitrary. That's good. Incident response in a wind farm is not the same as a petrochemical plant or a nuclear energy site. So it allows the industry to target their IR policies. It's bad for those same reasons. It provides a listing of things the company should be thinking about, but really it doesn't go into much detail. And I'm sure anyone who's worked in the government understands the impact that an audit can have. Previous work with the federal government, we'd have an IG audit come in. It was 2 months of dedicated effort to get screenshots of group policy and everything. They'd be there for 2 months, they would leave, another agency would come in and audit us. Failing those audits can be very expensive. If you fail a NERC SIP audit, the fines can be in the millions of dollars. So it kind of draws attention over to those compliance requirements. But as we all know, being compliant doesn't mean you are secure or prepared. A couple case studies. I was working with a local electric utility a year or two ago. And on the scoping call, we said, do you have security controls? Yes, they had firewalls. Okay, great. Do you have aggregated logging? And they said, no, but we do have all of our logs. They couldn't get them to us. They weren't sure how to extract them. So we got on site, they gave us access to the firewall, and they had 15-minute retention. We called it a first in, all out configuration. So their requirement said that they had to have logs. To them it meant, in PF Sense, you go down to that rule, log hits against this rule, yes, you check the box and you're good to go. They didn't think to check the resources on the box to see what their overwrite time was. I think visibility is a big one. A lot of times we say you have to have the capability for incident response. Well, full packet capture is great. Let's deploy it. Let's go a step better and put it on the core. So we see ingress, egress, and core traffic. It's really common, however, to have a DMZ between your IT and your OT or ICS network and your IT and the internet, unless you have your proxy set up in transparent mode or even just core routers, you run the risk of network address translation. So do you have full visibility? Yes. Is it useful for forensics? No. It looks like everything is going to or coming from a handful of IPs. Those MAC addresses get overwritten by the switches. I think the Target case is a great example. I think it was 2014, Target was hacked around Christmas. Got to be a big deal. 2 banks sued Target. Their claim in the lawsuit was that if Target was PCI compliant, they wouldn't have been hacked. If you handle processed credit card data, PCI compliance is what you need to have a license to handle that. I don't know if Target did it, but there was some rumors that Target was going to sue the vendor that they brought in to give them PCI compliance. So granted, it's a fund recovery effort, but think about that. Target is suing the vendor that gave them PCI compliance to mitigate another lawsuit that said they wouldn't have been hacked if they were PCI compliant. Sounds ridiculous. Feel free to laugh. So I think one approach is to come up with some difficult questions and see if your IR policies and documents answer these questions, and I would bet that they don't. I came up with some of these. If you have more, please shoot them to me. I'm looking to grow out a list. One is, when is IR justified? Normally, incident response procedures have an escalation document in there or some authority approvals. But when does that policy take effect? If we do tabletop exercises, we know we're going to use those plans and policies. We have them sitting on the table. If you have 3 users that bring your computer to the help desk because they're acting somewhat slow, you have a junior analyst that's looking at it and he isn't sure if it's adware, commodity, or something more advanced. When does that IR take effect? And I've seen it apply when more than 10 machines are infected, if it hits any part of the ICS network, if that machine exists somewhere in the Purdue model that you've established for your network, but have a launch point. What happens if resources are under command and control? The response is very different. In IT, we push off any type of remediation until we have a complete picture of what took place. Otherwise, you start blocking IPs, the adversary knows. They'll go dormant for 2 to 3 months and then come in through a back web shell that you haven't found yet. In ICS, we run that risk as well. However, the repercussions could be much more catastrophic. Once they know that we're onto them, they could push out ransomware, logic bomb, or something else that can have physical impact. And I think this is really the best one up here. When is a shutdown of operations warranted? It's not like IT, where we just disconnect from the internet. It was in the subreddit Shower Thoughts a while ago. Someone said, being a doctor is like a mechanic who has to fix the car while it's running. And I think that translates well to ICS incident response. I don't remember who said it, but Reddit doesn't give a shit about attribution anyway. So in ICS, sometimes to get the logs, we have to pull the box out of service, and we can't do that. It's very difficult to weigh the risk and reward until you have a complete picture of what's going on whether or not that shutdown is warranted. Generally, it's based on safety concerns. And I think last year a very interesting exercise took place overseas where a mock utility network was brought down, and they were doing a technical exercise. Jointly with that, they had a team of lawyers in London that were doing a lawsuit, mock trials and lawsuits, to determine liability. The judges that participated in that found the electric utility was liable for all damages to the customers that went without power. That is big. So the electric utility not only lost downtime, which is revenue, potentially had to rebuild the network, get new hardware if things were destroyed, but all of those clients out there that had an impact, those storing medicine that required refrigeration, any potential health impact, they were liable for those. So very big economic impact. Some sectors, like nuclear energy, the difference between security and safety is diminishing. It's almost completely gone. So in those regards, is incident response different than emergency response? That will impact the authorities in escalation period. And how do you operate if you can't trust the data being reported? Well-known attack out there recently that changed the speed of centrifuges spinning. However, the data reported to the SCADA system said everything was fine. We saw with Trisis that arbitrary code can be written to even safety devices that can change, potentially change what is reported to SCADA. So if I know this, let's use a wind farm as an example. If I know this ring network of turbines is not acting right, but my SCADA shows it's correct, how do I handle that? A lot of our renewable energy clients have wind farms that span multiple states. I need to have the resources to go out to those locations and the know-how to get the data needed. And that can be a very trying exercise when you're trying to do incident response economically. It can take a long time. And then really, do you have what you need to investigate root cause analysis? And ask the people that will be doing the work. So, into the meaty bits. I think it's kind of funny. I've never, in like 8 years of incident response, I've never gone to a client site and said, hey, can I get a network topology diagram and IP allocation mapping? And some guy says, oh yeah, here, I updated this last week. It's always written in like 1930 by some guy who doesn't work there, doesn't understand computers. It's not very useful. We all know that we need to have network diagrams, but nobody does. So we created this list, and this is what we give to our IR retainer customers. Now, in the ICS space, some of it is protected by, again, regulatory requirements. So we say, don't give it to us. Gather it and put it somewhere that is accessible. Keep it updated. Of note in here are, of course, network information, infrastructure details, security controls, things that the IR team can leverage when they come on site or when they're starting to do incident response. Generating playbooks. Playbooks are getting to be a little more popular in the IT and ICS sector. We've already released some content on this. No, Ben, come sit down. Oh, fair enough. So out on the blog posting at the top, we've released a little more refined write-up on this, but some key points that I wanted to hit on. The key goal of a playbook is to facilitate your junior analysts, to let them get started either gathering logs or responding, triaging data right away. I think key points of a playbook are what questions based on the alert should be asked, and then what data do you need to answer those. Really, I think a key problem that a lot of organizations face internally is knowledge transfer, and this is a great way to facilitate that. So under contents, triage techniques. One thing that I hear commonly with junior analysts when they start looking at encrypted traffic, like SSH, well, it's encrypted, I can't tell anything. This is where the triage techniques, I would say, well, look at source and dest information, of course, but look at bytes transferred ratio. Is that consistent? Is the periodic between the sessions consistent? That's indicative of a service instead of a human. That kind of helps prioritize. And then when creating playbooks, if you're not sure where to start, I would say start with those routine functions. When you come in, the first part of the day, what reports do you look at? If something in those reports looks weird, what are you going to do? And I hate the exercises that say, tell someone how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, but assume they don't know what bread is or peanut butter or jelly or a knife. It's not an exercise in documentation. Keep it bullet points, keep it simple, but help that junior analyst be able to get started until support can arrive. The future is to leverage APIs where they exist, plug it in with your other tools like your case management solution. So this is one screenshot for a sample playbook for a screenshot being exfiltrated from an HMI device. And we can see under 2 here we have the assist me, and we leverage playbooks to put in best practice information. So if the receiving host is external, in bold here, do not attempt to connect or scan to it. So you can write in best practices to help protect the organization as well. Under 3, look at the image. We have view extracted files. It's not efficient if we have the analyst go to another tool and have to query down to that data to pull it. So if you can, leverage APIs, make the data presentable, and then say a junior analyst looks at it and says, yeah, it's sensitive HMI information. What should I do? We have this assist me category where we provide context. And when available, specific threat adversary groups that are known to use that tradecraft. I think this is really the key knowledge transfer piece, because now that junior analyst can go pull a threat report on Dymaloy or whatever activity group it was and see what else they should begin triaging. Finally, maintaining in-house the incident response capabilities, host forensics, malware reverse engineering, those are very expensive skills to keep when hopefully you don't have to use them that often. So outsourcing, IR, incident response insurance is becoming more popular. Don't just establish an IR retainer with a company. Build that relationship. I think establishing first, again, this should seem obvious, but it's rarely done, who's going to lead the incident. I've done incident response engagements where we arrive on site, they give us domain admin, say, all right, you've got 2 weeks, now present it to the board. Generally, it's led by some IT manager or technical person, but have that established before. Know how you're going to share information, what type of communication you'll do, if it will be email, text, whatever. Physical and logical access are big concerns, especially in ICS. Personal protection equipment that's needed, what you need to get on site to get into the actual laboratory. I think one of the biggest questions that you need to think about is what equipment can be used. From working IT incident response, every time I arrived on site, I've got my virtual machines, my tools I love, and the client says, oh, you can't connect to our network. You can't touch a keyboard because I haven't done the background checks needed for the financial sector or whatever. So we're shoulder surfing throughout the entire engagement. If we knew that ahead of time, we could have planned appropriately. One thing I would recommend for some environments, like nuclear energy sites where everything at certain levels is considered a critical asset, cables, keyboard, mice, everything. In those instances, have the IR retainer staff get the training that they need beforehand. Have them get the NERC-CIP training. And then get 2 or 3 laptops, ask them what tools they need, and put the tools on the laptops. Build them out, stick them in a locker, update them quarterly, but that way they can land and have the tools. If I can't save logs to a USB drive and use my own tool suite on them, I'm really not going to be efficient if I'm limited to Excel. Data handling, if they can pull that data off, if they have to analyze it on your system. And do them a favor, take half an hour and establish a timeline of what has taken place before you call them. I've been on multiple initial calls where there's 10 to 15 people. And it's like, well, Joe put this firewall rule in place, and then we started having these alerts, and Joe responded to it, but we're not sure if he sanitized the laptop or not, and whatever took place. And it makes the IR analyst have to rebuild that timeline, sit down and tell them what was found, the original indicators, what took place, and what actions you have already done. It really allows the IR team to hit the ground running and pick up the work from where you left off. And also train together. At Dragos, one thing that we really encourage is to do a tabletop exercise or some type of limited engagement to see how each company operates. We assist with GridX for a couple of our retainer clients. So if you have a retainer, reach out, take 3 or 4 hours and ask them to go through their process with you. And I would say actually work through the process. Have them call the IR hotline. Have them initiate an actual mock engagement. Have them share sample data. You would go back and request what logs additionally you would need and actually work through it with them. So to keep it short and sweet, preparing for incident response, your compliance dictates you have to have IR policies and procedures. Those do very little. I would think of them as a good listing of what documents, what things you should be thinking about, but avoid that checkbox security. Really gather information about your network. We all should be doing this. We've heard it for years. Nobody is doing it efficiently. Generate playbooks, facilitate that knowledge transfer, because when an actual IR event happens, that is really what improves the efficiency. That allows whoever gets the first alert to begin gathering logs. If you have 15-minute retention, well, avoid that at all costs, but at least then you can start grabbing that volatile information if that junior analyst knows what to do. And then build relationships with the IR retainers. So again, we'll release, I'm pointing on my laptop screen like you can see it. We'll release some information on our blog site with some of these sample documents that you can download and tweak to your own environment. And then if you have any other questions on companies or other examples of questions that companies should be asking themselves to really make sure that they're prepared, then shoot those to me. I'd be certainly interested. And I think we've got 5 minutes for questions. Correction, we have no minutes? Okay, yeah.
You mentioned NERC-CIP standards. I know that those apply at the bulk level when it comes to the grid. At the distribution level, what are the requirements? Is it just going
So, great question. I have a very confusing slide in here somewhere that I pulled out for time. But nuclear energy generation, just to show an example. So the NRC is ultimately responsible for safety in that area. So the NRC got together and did that example that I showed earlier, somewhat arbitrary. So the asset owners got together and said, what does this mean? And they went to NEI and said, tell us how to interpret the NRC's guidance. They came out with 0809 that had a little more granularity, but it's still very abstract. Once the power hits a switchyard and it gets transferred to high voltage for transmission, then FERC takes over. NRC and FERC are independent government agencies. So FERC is responsible for reliability. Well, they're federal government, so they didn't feel like it was their place to identify those requirements. And so they gave the ERO, or that organizational responsibility, to NERC. Part of NERC is critical infrastructure protection, which is NERC SIP, and they really take over at that, the transmission line for distribution out to clients. So from the outside, it looks very confusing. Inside, it's a little better understood. And I know this font is small, but if you read these descriptions, they're all somewhat arbitrary. The intent is to have organizations decipher what they should be thinking about. Unfortunately, what happens is organizations check a box. They do what is needed to fulfill that requirement, complete the audits, and then they move on. Yeah.
You mentioned the issue of non-trustworthy data coming from your sensors. And are you finding that your clients are open to the idea of changing their data collection and changing their supervisory and reporting systems in order to ensure that their data is trustworthy, or to have a way to detect when data shouldn't be trusted?
So the question, are customers really open to, I would say, additional technologies or solutions to validate the data being reported to the SCADA systems? They're certainly open to whatever improvements they can do that won't impact operations. One of the main concerns is if a physical device has a firmware overwritten, then there's nothing really you can put between that and the SCADA system that will validate that data, depending on how your environment's set up. You can have like redundant temperature sensors, but really if a safety system, like with TriSys, is responsible for monitoring certain things and that firmware is overwritten, I guess short answer, very contingent on your environment. Is a customer open to it? Absolutely. They want to get better. They want to be doing the right things. Other questions? All right, then I think, are we about out of time? 5 minutes. So I've got a very small dance. It is highly inappropriate, but just hold on. No, I'm kidding. I think the other track is right next door. So when we shut this down, your job is to cheer and loud, crazy like, so the person next door gets kind of shaken and feels like he has to compensate. So that's all I've got. No other questions? Cool. Thank you, guys. All right. Now you're patronizing.